I'm John Rofrano, Senior VAST Trainer here for Boris TV, and welcome to Boris Continuum Complete for Final Cut Pro 10 training. In this episode, we're going to take a look at BCC Extruded EPS. This is one of the plugins in the 3D Objects set. And Extruded EPS takes encapsulated PostScript files and extrudes them in 3D space. If you're familiar with EPS files, they're usually vector files, although they can contain bitmaps, and clients usually make their logos with Adobe Illustrator and then export them as an AI file or an EPS file. And so that's what I've done here. Everything you're seeing on the screen was done completely with assets from the internet. I had no exclusive access to a customer's logo. I just found these on the internet. There's lots of EPS files out there, and nothing screams production value like showing your customer their logo extruded in 3D space in a promotion. You know, they'll think you spent hours and hours doing something in a 3D program, and you just spent a couple of minutes in Final Cut Pro 10 with Boris Continuum Complete 3D Objects. So let's switch over to Final Cut Pro 10 and get started. This is the project that I created that you just saw rendered on the screen. You'll notice there's quite a few layers, quite a few connected objects here. You can see in the middle I've got my smoke, I've got things above the smoke, behind the smoke. I'm going to show you how to put all this together. Obviously this is a fairly complex project and it's going to take more than one episode. So in the first episode I'm going to concentrate on showing you how to make the 3D objects. And then in the second episode we'll put them all together and animate them and build up the motion graphic. Now before I start, I just want to switch over to Boris's website and show you where you can get Boris Continuum Complete. If you go to Products, under Continuum Complete for Apple, you'll see you can buy the entire Continuum Complete set. But if you're just interested in the 3D objects, you can get those too. We'll go back to Products, go to Continuum Units, and then there's a bunch of Continuum units that you can buy separately. So if you just wanted objects and particles, just a couple of them, you can go to 3D Objects and just get the 3D objects. For those of you who are familiar with Final Cut Pro 7 and the Boris 3D Text plugin, this is the successor to that 3D Titles plugin that Boris had. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to start with a new project because I want to build these up from scratch and show you how I build them. Let's start with something basic just to get you going. I'm going to go to the generators and I'm going to take a pastel generator and just drop it here in my main storyline. And then I'll switch back to my plugins and I'll take BCC Extruded EPS and drag and drop that on. The first thing it's going to tell me is that I need to pick an external file. So we'll click here to pick up an external file. And I'm going to start with this Leaf and Frames logo. Now before I do, let me show you what it looks like. So I'll just switch over to the OS. So this is just a fictitious company logo that was saved as an AI file, and we're going to bring that in. Now it's important that these are Illustrator 8 AI files when you bring them in. So let me go back over here and pick that logo. So Leaf and Flames AI. We also have the EPS version here. I'm just going to open it up, and there it is. The logo that you saw is the logo that you see in Boris. So I want to go to 100% so we can really get close to this. And I may even increase the master scale just so we can get close and see what's going on here. What I want to show you is, first, you need to decide how you want to extrude and how you want the edges to be. Now, you'll notice if we'll go down here to the bevel, and if you increase the bevel amount, I'm just going to increase it a bit, you'll notice that it can start biting into the contours of the EPS file. So you should be careful with this. I like this 2.5 setting. The straight bevel doesn't look as nice, I think, as the convex bevel. So now I'm going to switch it to convex, and you'll see that's a nice smooth bevel there. I really like that. Let me see if I can bring the master scale up just to get you closer to it. It's just a nice, smooth, rounded bevel, and I really like that bevel better. And then, depending on taste, you might want to increase the extrusion. So we'll go down to the extrusion depth. I'm going to bring it up to 5 so we can really see this extruded. And now you get a really thick extrusion. You might not like it that thick, bring it back to 3. The point is you have full control over how much this gets extruded in 3D space. Now I want to bring to your attention here There's, again, I'm going to bring the scale up. I really want you to see how this is being affected here. You can see there are some lines, some flat lines around these circles. You can see it pretty good on this circle here. We can fix that by increasing the polygon count. So down here, the polygon count defaults to 24. As we bring that up, you notice that smoothing out nicely. So I'm going to keep it at 24 just for manipulating the text when we're editing it. And then when we go to render, we can bring it up much higher. So polygon count will take care of any of those lines. Okay, let me go back to the top and bring the master scale back to 100. And I'll bring the position back to the middle. Okay, so you'll notice it has all the same controls that we saw in the extruded text in the other 3D objects. Pretty much the 3D objects have a similar set of parameters. You can move the position in on the z-axis, you could bring it closer, you could bring it further away. Notice when I brought it closer, it got darker because there are lights in the scene. And as you go past the lights no longer shine on the object. So it's important to understand whether you feel you should bring the object closer by positioning it in 3D space where the lights are fixed, or whether you just want to make it bigger by scaling it up. So sometimes we'll position it in 3D space, and sometimes we'll scale it up. And in fact, I'm going to scale this just a little so you can see it better here. Then you have all of your rotation. You can rotate on the x-axis, right, which is going to rotate top to bottom. You can rotate on the y-axis, which will spin it side to side. And then you can rotate on the z-axis, which spins it around an imaginary axis in the middle, right, coming from the z-plane. And then you can independently scale it if you needed to make it bigger for some reason in the x or y. I usually leave these at 100. Very rarely have any reason to play with those. And then we have the orbit cam, just like we had in BC Extruded Text, so that we could spin around the object, right? And this is really a camera that's rotating around the object. The object itself is not spinning. And the nice thing about that is the lights stay where they are, right? When you spin the object, you get different lighting effects. But if you rotate around it, you get the same lighting effect on each side. So let's move down and see how the coloring on this object works. You'll notice that there's this option here, use file color. Now when I showed you the file had these colors, and when it came in, it actually used the colors that were in the file. But you could turn this off and it will just use a single color. So if you wanted to colorize this and let's say make it all blue, you could do that. So you have the ability to use the file color by checking this box, or you don't need to use the file color. You can even use a texture. You'll notice there's a texture well here. And if I click on the texture well, I can then go to a set of textures. And as I had showed in a previous episode, I imported the Boris Effects textures and put them into a library so that I could use those. And so you might want to use, one of the textures. Say this is a texture you want to use. You can do apply clip, and it will tell you that you're editing between libraries, and you can then apply that texture. So you really have a fair amount of control over changing the look of the texture. Let me go back and use the color, because I kind of like the color of this. And so I'm going to turn the texture off by clicking X. Now I've got the color back. And I want to go down to the bottom. The lighting is similar as in the 3D objects. There's 3-point lighting, and I can actually change the color of the light so that you can see where they're coming from. Light number 1, of course you can move these lights. I mean, by default, light number 1 is in the upper left. Light number 2 is to your right. You can see the colors really changing on the right side there. And then light number 3 is in the back. A little more subtle, but you can see, if you look in here, you can see the colors changing in the back. So you have 3-point lighting, and then we have this drop shadow. I didn't show you the drop shadow in the last episode because I had a black background, and that's why I chose a white background for this episode. So you can turn on drop shadow. You can play with the distance of the shadow. So here we can see it coming into distance. If you want to make it a little darker, you can raise the opacity so it's not so opaque. You can also soften it a bit on the edges if you'd like. Let me throw it a little further away. And so now I've got a nice shadow that's going to follow my object. So let me go back up to rotate it on the y-axis so you can see. So I'm clicking on rotate on the y, and I'm just changing the values, and there you can see the shadow following the object. So if you need to have a shadow on an object and you want the shadow to follow the movement of the object, you can do 3D shadows. Okay, now let me turn this off for a second. Now, don't you love it when you watch a demo and someone does something and it works perfectly, and then you try it and it doesn't work? Well, that happens a lot with EPS files. So I want to take you through one that's not going to work, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So let me come back up here and pick another file. Let me just get this a little bit better. We'll not rotate on the Z so much, and maybe do 60 degrees and minus 12 here. Actually, let me flatten it out, because this will let you see what's going on. So here's another EPS file. Got this off of the internet, abstract tree logo. And when you bring that in, look at what's happening here. I really want to flatten it up and go to 100%. Look at these lines, right? What's happening there, right? You expected to see a logo, and let me actually show you the logo. So if we look at this abstract tree logo, it's beautiful, right? This is what I want to see in Final Cut. But what's happened here is the way that the person who created the logo did it in such a way that you have these lines. So let me open up this logo in Illustrator and show you what's going on. If I open this logo in Illustrator, look what happens when I mouse over these. For some reason, they've taken sections, right? Instead of this being a solid object, they've taken sections and kind of, stitched them together. And I guess when you print it, it doesn't show, but when you do something like extrusion, it does. So this is really easy to fix. You'll go into your Pathfinder, so make sure your Pathfinder window is open. Mine is. I have it on the side here because I use it a lot. And then in your Pathfinder, you just want to click on the Unite icon to unite this whole thing. So watch what happens when I click on this. There, it becomes one solid object. I'm going to go down to Company, do the same thing, click on it, one solid object. Now the lines aren't in there anymore. So the lines were actually in the EPS file itself. We'll go to save it, and here's a really important point. When you save these files, and I'm going to save it as an EPS file, instead of converted, I'm going to call it fixed. And when you save these files, make sure you save them in Illustrator 8 format. Boris Continuum Complete Extruded EPS likes Illustrator 8 EPS files. Those are the most compatible. So we're going to select EPS 8, click OK, accept all the warnings, and let's go back over to Final Cut, and now I'm going to bring in the fixed file. So I'll click on External File. Here is my fixed EPS file. I open it, and there you go. That is the file that you expected to come in the first time. So quick fix, but sometimes you have to prepare your EPS files just a little bit to make them come in correctly. So once again, we've got this nice logo in here, and we can rotate it for the client, even make it a network bug down in the lower right-hand corner. Lots of things you can do with these EPS files. Okay, but what if the client's logo is a little more complicated? I'm going to delete and start over with a more complicated logo. I'm going to go back to the generators, and this time I'm going to take a grayscale generator and put it in. And now I'm going to take Extruded EPS, but I'm going to take the one that says multiple textures, because we're going to use a different face texture and side texture. So now I'm going to pick a file, and this time I'm going to pick the Ferrari that we had, the Ferrari logo, the full Ferrari logo, and it's Adobe Illustrator file. I'm going to bring that in. So look what's going on here, right? There's just lots of noise in here because of all the detail in the file. Remember, what BCC Extruded EPS is doing, let me get this up to 100%, what it's doing is it's taking all the detail in the file and trying to extrude it into 3D objects. And it's not necessary. It's just too much. There's no reason to use a file that is that complex. So I'm going to show you a better way to handle this. Let me go back and fit the window. What I did was I opened up that file in Illustrator, and all I saved was the outline. So I have this Ferrari logo outline, and now I have just the basics of the file, right? I just have the outline, the shield, and the Ferrari name. And I specifically saved the shield as red and the name as black, and you'll see why in a minute. So let's go back over to my project. In my EPS project, I have a bunch of logos, right? You can almost guess what's going to come next. So now what I want to do is map the detailed logo onto the face of the 3D object. So let's go do that. I'm going to come down to texture. Now you'll notice in this one I have material mapping, right? In the last Extruded EPS plugin, I only had one face for everything. The one that has multiple faces allows you to do front for all, just like the first one did, or you could have the front and back use one texture and the side and bevel use another, or you can have the front back use a texture and the side uses a different one and the bevel uses a different one, or front, back, bevel, and side all use different textures. For this one, I'm going to leave it on one for all, and I'm going to show you why I'm using this one. So I'm going to click on the texture well here, and then we'll click on the logo. And look, it maps the logo right on to the front of the extruded object. Now, this wasn't magic. I have to admit, there's a little bit of prep here. So I took this logo and I centered it in a 1280 by 720 image because that's the size of my project down here. So I wanted to make sure that everything was the same size. If it isn't, you can certainly go change the size. Let me go apply this while I'm talking. If it isn't, you can certainly change the size, but it's a lot harder, right? Let me show you where you would change it. If you needed to, you can come here to Scale X and Scale Y, and you could change the Scale X, right? You can scale it out, so if you try to get the thing to fit, and you can scale it in the Y and, you know, and move things around. I find it much easier if you do a little bit of prep to begin with, and you make everything the same size. So the EPS file and the PNG file, which had the graphic, were the same. I made sure they were the same size so that they mapped perfectly, and it just saves you lots and lots of headaches later. Okay, let me show you why I needed multiple textures. So I'm going to go over and spin this just a little bit on the Y. And you can probably see what's happening already, and I want to extrude it a little more. So let me go to my extrusion depth and make it 5. I'm going to make my bevel convex so that it's not so bold. And what's happening on the side here, right? Well, what's happening is this front texture is being mapped randomly to the side of the object, and it just doesn't look good, right? So that's why when you're mapping a logo on top of a 3D object, you need more than one texture. You need at least front, back, and sides. So I'm going to say I want to use the front and back for one, and the side and bevel I want to use a different texture, and it's fixed. Now, the reason it's fixed and it looks so good is because when I created the EPS file, I selected red for the shield, right? Because, you know, a little bit of foresight and planning. So I'm using the file color, right? Now, I didn't have to use the file color. I could say I want the side to be black, and that's certainly fine. I can just use a color, but everything is black. This side is black and the back is black. And so by doing a little bit of planning and making the shield red and the Ferrari name black, I knew that I could map the Ferrari logo onto the front, and then the sides would pick up the colors from the logo, right? So again, no magic here, just planning. So that's how I got the Ferrari logo into the opening sequence. And I did that with each of the logos. And so you'll also notice that when I rotate this, which is another nice thing, is that when I rotate this in 3D space, I have the logo on the back as well. Let me get this around. Now you probably can't tell, but I can because I'm looking for it. The back bevels are not on. So let me go down and turn on back bevels. Remember we said in the previous tutorial that if the back doesn't bevel by default, so there you can see, here, let me go back to 100% here for you can see what's going on here. Just look here where a bevel should be. Back bevels are turned off by default because there's no need to render them if you're not going to spin your logo, but we are spinning our logos, so we want to keep our back bevels on. And so now I have a Ferrari logo that I can spin around in 3D space, and no matter how you twist it, it's going to say Ferrari. All right, it's going to have this nice Ferrari logo on it. Okay, so that wraps it up for this first half of the episode. Hopefully you understand how you can bring EPS files in with your client's logo or other image, extrude them into 3D space, and use them in your projects. Or if you've got a complex logo, you can just bring in a simple form of the logo and map an image of the logo on the top of it and have something that looks very complex but is really composed of something very simple. In the next episode, we're going to create the rest of the logos and then show you how I animated them in 3D space and had them appear both in front of and behind the smoke at times. If you have any questions, go to borisfx.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Until next time, this is John Rofrano for Boris TV. Thanks for watching.